And speaking of Camerata Nova, we're going to chat about Camerata Nova right now. Their last concert of the season, well, almost last concert. I'll tell you why it's almost their last concert is taking place this weekend. It's called British Mysteries. In the studio with me this morning, I have John Wiens, who's in town all the way from Montreal. He's going to be conducting with Camerata Nova. And I've also got Andrew Balfour, who is the artistic director, and baritone, one of the singers in Camerata Nova. Good morning to you both.
Morning.
Hi.
And welcome from Montreal again, and welcome back. You were in with Polly Coral last time.
Yep.
So now you're in with Camerata Nova.
It's exciting.
It is. So again, thank you. I'm going to get you guys just a little bit closer to the mic when you're talking. That way we can hear you a lot better. So, British Mysteries. Now, I like the title of that. I like the title of British Mysteries. And tell us where you came up with the concept of British Mysteries and what the mystery is that you're going to be solving this weekend. Thanks,
well,
Andrew.
I can tell you, actually, we were... it came up about a year and a half ago. We were originally going to have Christopher Jackson come in and help us do our last concert of our 20th anniversary. And unfortunately, Christopher passed away last year, so we actually thought about another person was on our radar, which was this gentleman right next to me, John Wiens, who has worked with Christopher and sung with him over many years in Montreal. British Mysteries was a concert that Christopher basically came up with his group in Montreal, SMAM, and we thought about retweaking it for Camerata. Basically a combination between old English music and new music, or at least music from the 20th century. So we tweaked it a little bit, and we really felt we've always wanted to work with John, actually, since we saw his work here last year with Polly Coral, and such an outstanding musician with early music. It was a natural fit for us. So the mystery part of it is that there are many aspects of this music that John will go into in a while, but basically we were thinking of this idea of like the mystery of the human voice along with the traditions of either Renaissance music or 20th century music that approached by Sir John Taverner, who was just one of, I think, England's greatest choral conductors of the 20th century, who really took a different direction of choral music, I believe, that was so spiritual.
Mm-hmm. Now, his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, did I get that right? There's 5 times, according to him, is the other composer, John Taverner. So tell us about
a few more generations.
A few more generations than that. Maybe great.
Aren't all the English related?
That I don't know. I'm not English myself, so maybe you
correct. It's a small island, so.
It's a small island, that's right. Just like in Winnipeg, small city, everybody's related here in Winnipeg. So tell us about the other John Taverner. I mean, more familiar, I guess, with the 20th century composer, John Taverner. So John, do you want to tell us about this early John Taverner? There's not a lot, and that's
early
one of the
John
mysteries,
Taverner
isn't it?
is a bit of a mystery.
Kind of a mystery, yeah.
We know enough about him that we can, write books about it, but we don't know nearly enough about his character, and we have no understanding about how he came to write his music or how he came to leave music. We know what he left music for, but we don't know why. And there's a really huge story arc there that's sort of missing, thanks to the dissolution of the monasteries and the other Catholic infrastructure at about 1530, which is around the time that John Taverner left music. So there's a story there to tell, but we don't know the story completely.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, there's a few composers that are like that. We know a lot about most composers, but when you come across somebody like John Taverner, so when you listen to his music or when you sing his music, and often when you're singing a composer's music, you know some of their background, you know a little bit about them. Is it more challenging when you come to sing the music of the old John Taverner, not knowing a lot about his history and about what he was writing necessarily?
Well, that's sort of par for the course with that time in England. From about 1470 to 1530, they wrote music that was almost exactly the same in lots of respects. Certainly all the music has its own unique characteristics, but the style that they used in an overarching way was very similar. And we know almost nothing about most of the composers from that era. So we really do go to the music. And from that respect, it's actually one of the purest musical presentations you can make, because you're unfettered by a whole bunch of information that you would have if it was a continental composer.
There's no interpretation necessarily. It's just note for note.
Oh, no, there's interpretation.
There is
There's
interpretation.
Tons of interpretation.
So what do you interpret then? And what is there to interpret?
Well, that's what I mean, is that you examine the score as a pure musical entity without, like if we were going to do a piece of Beethoven, we'd read a lot about Beethoven and we would infer a great deal about his character into the music that we were going to do and about the certain time in his life. We don't worry about that with something like early John Taverner. Instead we have the score, and we have probably like about 7 masses and a number of really fine motets. And what we do instead is we examine those.
Yeah.
And then we go to the music that we're going to perform for this one particular concert, and we say, okay, well, based on all of those other pieces, probably something like this.
Might be fun to make up a character for him and then do the music. Maybe. You never know what he'd come up with about that.
Well, yeah. We could. There is a little information that I could offer about the Mass. Like, for instance, we know it was written for a special occasion, because that's the only time that Masses were written for. It was written for a specific feast day of the year, and that was the only day that they brought it out to sing. So that made the act of doing that Mass a very special thing, because polyphony wasn't something that got sung on a continual basis during church services in England at that time. It was largely chanting, and then when there was a special occasion, they'd pull out polyphony. So it was a really big deal then, and it's a big deal now.
So you've conducted a lot of different choirs.
Yeah.
Now you're, you have. Tell me about Camerata Nova and pulling these voices together.
They're very unique. They have a 20-year history in which they've had, I think, some members who've been in the ensemble for well over a decade. And so there's a series of agreements that they have amongst themselves that is unique to forming the way that they present themselves, the way they conduct their business, and the way they sing. And the interesting thing about working with them is there are some things that they do so very well. You know, like they have a blend that is just amazing. And it's been the process of working with that and trying to give them some elements of what life would have been like, I think, during the time of Taverner and Tallis, to give them a little more information to work with in terms of how they'd present the sounds. That has been the most interesting. Yeah.
Thank you, John. I'm in the studio with John Wiens, who's conducting Camerata Nova this weekend, and Andrew Balfour, who's the artistic director, one of the singers in Camerata Nova. Andrew, let's turn the microphone over to you for 1 second. Tell us a bit about the other music you've paired up with John Taverners for the weekend.
First off, I wish I was singing this weekend, but I haven't actually been singing with Camerata for quite a few years, off and on. So the other music that we thought was a very, very unique and enigma in English choral music in the last century, the 20th century. I call him Sir John Taverner. He actually doesn't have the R Taverner. He's Taverner. But he's an enigma because he was born at the end of the Second World War. Came out of that sort of like really strong generation that we associate with terms of the pop culture, in terms of the Beatles or the Rolling Stones and the longevity that they had in their art. Taverner came along as a sort of an avant-garde composer in the late 50s, early 60s, and was recognized almost immediately by John Lennon and Paul McCartney as being very unique. He was one of the first major artists actually to record on the Apple label, and actually recorded his very, very unique and very, very different from what you'll hear tonight, Whale Oratorio, which is about Jonah and the whale, and just how they were using even technology back then in terms of recording, was very unique in terms of surround sound and his voices. I was listening to it the other day, actually. There was the guy that plays Gandalf in Lord of the Rings. What's that actor's name?
Ian McKellen.
Ian McKellen is actually a narrator. A young Ian McKellen is a narrator in that. So it's just really unique in terms of how his style changed over the 60s, and he said in the early 70s he had a revelation, he also said he had a lot of LSD and in those times, and had this sort of spiritual awakening where he was able to actually refocus his creative talent towards actually he went really all the way to the Eastern Orthodox Church in terms of being a devout a disciple of that style, the tradition, and really changed things around in terms of how he wrote music, but also how he approached music for the human voice, and how he was influenced by the really very different traditions, obviously from the Church of England to the Eastern Orthodox Church, and this idea of mysticism and this idea of miracles that are happening in the tradition of these services, which are actually the same thing as John was talking about back in the early days of whether it was Roman Catholic. There was always this idea of mystery and miracles happening, whether it's the host turning into the body of Christ, or that happened in a much more enlarged and ritualistic way in the Eastern Orthodox Church. So he's a really unique the way that he changed music in terms of he didn't really carry on the tradition like maybe a John Rutter or other composers of his generation did. He actually took it to a very spiritual place, much like Byrd did on the continent, using past like the Renaissance, like Byrd did, and medieval music that he studied, into a new form of structure that was new, at least for the 20th century ears. So I feel that it's a great combination. We're doing some very, very unique pieces, and how Taverner himself described himself as a universalist. He wasn't an Orthodox composer. He wasn't a Christian composer. He was a universalist. He used all his influences from the Middle East, studying East Indian chords and the chromaticisms of that type of music. You can really kind of hear it, but he's not showing off. He's not doing, I can do all, he's basically writing strong music that's very emotional. I think it's paired quite well. And I think that's really the idea that Christopher Jackson had about this idea of these different styles. So I think it's very unique. And as John said, it's demanding. In our 20 years of history, what I always say to our group is that you've never sung your best concert yet. We're still going. So I think that's great for the young people in our group and our older veterans, that it's all new. And so John brings that to the table.
Interesting. So you're also doing music of Gavin Bryars, which should be what piece are you doing of Gavin Bryars, or is that one not happening this weekend? That one's been changed.
Yeah, we had to change it.
You have to change that. So what else? William Byrd.
Yeah, we put in the Byrd Mass for 5 voices, which is a mystery in its own way, because we have no idea how on earth he survived publishing that work. He published 3 masses, sort of back to back, in around 1590, and it was music that was uncomfortable from the sense that it wasn't strictly legal. It was music that wasn't really supposed to be performed, especially not in an Anglican church. And here he was publishing it. So the way he got around it was he didn't put his name on it.
That's one way to do it.
He published it anonymously, and that way everybody got it if they wanted it.
Yeah, someone like Prince used to do, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. Not so different.
Not so
different. One interesting thing about the modern John Taverner is that he was universally recognized. The Beatles recognized him for the talent that he had, and so did Benjamin Britten, who insisted on that they commission an opera from him. So people knew about him all the way across the board in every field of music, clearly. So he had a lot to say. He did a great job.
Well, so this is the final concert of Camerata Nova season. It's called British Mysteries, music of Taverner and Taverner. One without an R, one with an R. Wanted to make that clear. It's happening Saturday and Sunday, April 3rd.
One with 1 R, the other with 2 R's, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so.
Just for people don't phone in and say, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah, and believe me, we get people phoning. When we make mistakes, we know about it instantly. The phones start lighting up. We have very passionate listeners. But it's going to be an amazing concert at Camerata Nova. But just before we wrap up, you mentioned this isn't quite the final concert of Camerata Nova. There's something special happening in May as well, right? Tell us about that concert, Andrew.
No, this is a very unique opportunity for both myself as a composer and Camerata Nova. We are performing the piece that I wrote back at the New Music Festival, the Symphony, 2 years ago, called Take the Indian, a vocal reflection on missing children. And so several people from the museum were at that concert and asked us this year whether we could do that again in John Buehler Hall on May 25th at 7 p.m. So we're basically going to do it with a little bit more movement, a little bit more on my part, a little bit more acting, I guess. It's a very unique opportunity because there are several people from the National Arts Centre that will be here in town to be able to witness this as well. So it's unique for Camerata, and it's a big way to finish off our year. Actually, it has been a very busy year, and all our singers have worked extremely hard. So we actually have our 20th anniversary party next weekend. So it's going to be nice to unwind, but we also right back at it for our last official performance of the year.
Well, congratulations on another amazing season. Continue to keep growing and learning. And John, thanks for coming in as well, and enjoy your concert with them this weekend. Go to CamerataNova.com for more information about the concerts, more information about the group. They've been around 20 years already, and still doing some great things. Their concert is coming up Saturday, April 30th at 8 p.m., Sunday, May 1st at 3 p.m. Crescent Fort Rouge United Church. Again, go to CamerataNova.com for tickets.